So I'd been in Hong Kong for about 2 weeks. I had a job. I just didn't have a home. And so I would sometimes spend the night under my desk on the 13th floor. And then other times I'd trek down to our second floor, which I would find some cushy couches to sleep on. But there was a nightclub right underneath the second floor, so the beats that were being played in the club would rock me to sleep. Other times I have a colleague, maybe they're out of town, he allowed me to stay in his apartment for 2 weeks, but I didn't have a home otherwise. I didn't get really paid enough to actually afford it there in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is expensive. One day I'd been going to this church called Solomon's Porch. They didn't know me, they didn't know my story, but I'd go to their prayer meetings, I'd go to their Sunday service, and one day a gentleman comes up to me, and he says, I feel like God's telling me you need to come and live with me. Further than that, he said, I don't know how much you can afford, but make sure you tithe to the church, and whatever you can afford after that, pay. Now, this is central Hong Kong. Think about Manhattan prices. And he's just saying, make sure you tithe to the church. Make sure Jesus gets his payment, and whatever you can afford after that, however meager, however much, then you pay that to me. A miracle. The thing about miracles is you can't make them happen. They actually have to happen to you. If something extraordinary has actually taken place. There's an apologist that I like to read a little bit about. He serves with Rabbi Zacharias, and he said he's starting, as he gets into conversations with people now, he'll ask this question. He said, and the more scientific you are, he said, I love this question even more. He says, has there ever been a time in your life that you've had an experience that made you think that there might be a God out there? He says, more often than not, there's a silent lull, followed by a nervous laugh, followed by, well, there was this one time when. Well, if that assessment's true, that more often than not, people have this experience, and it's probably not a stretch to say that more of you than not have had that sort of a scenario as well. Something happened I couldn't explain by ordinary means. Something else happened. A miracle. But miracles are not meant to point to themselves. They're meant to point to the one who sent them. Amen. And we're going to be looking at a passage this morning, briefly. My words are going to be few this morning. We're going to be followed by just kind of an activity together. But there's these two miracles that happen that they're meant to point to who Jesus is. One of the big questions we're trying to answer in this encounter series is, what does Jesus say about himself? Who is he? And then as we encounter him, then maybe we can tell everybody else, this is what he says about himself, and this is what I've found him to be. But we see from his own disciples that they miss it. They've seen the miracle, they just didn't get the direction sign. So I'm going to read Mark 6:31 through 52, and then I'm just going to make a few observations. It says, Jesus said to them, come away by yourselves to a remote place and rest for a while. For many people were coming and going, they didn't even have time to eat. So they went away in a boat by themselves to a remote place. But many saw them leaving and recognized them, and they ran on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of him. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd and had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Then he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples approached him and said, this place is deserted. It's already late. Go ahead and send them home so they can find something to eat. Jesus said, you give them something to eat. They said to him, should we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat? He asked them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then he instructed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. He took the 5 loaves, the 2 fish. Looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke the loaves. He kept giving them to the disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. Everyone ate and was satisfied. They picked up the 12 baskets full of pieces of bread and fish. Now those who had eaten the loaves were 5,000 men. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After he said goodbye to them, he went away to the mountain to pray. Well into the night, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. he saw them straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Very early in the morning, he came toward them walking on the sea, and he wanted to pass by them. When they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out because all they saw, and they were terrified. Immediately he spoke with them and said, "Have courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he got into the boat with them. The wind ceased, and they were completely astounded because they had not understood about the loaves. Instead, their hearts were hardened. Reading of God's Word. So when we see, we're going to make a few Old Testament connections here. All right, just to kind of start this off, because we see Jesus here. You'll notice a little bit of his character, that he sees a large crowd, and he has compassion on them. When he's trying to get his folks away, he says, "You're tired," and we can probably all agree that serving Jesus, sometimes it can be very tiring. This is their whole work. If you're a Christian, no matter if you're in full-time vocational or non-vocational ministry, it's like you're a missionary. So therefore, when you start your day at work, you go home, you have your MC, you're a full-time missionary. And you have to agree, sometimes you get a little tired. Sometimes you get a little bit hungry. But also sometimes your schedule starts to fill up. So he wants to take his disciples away, have a little rest and relaxation, but his compassion gets in the way. His compassion compels him to talk with this large group that's here. And this is our first little Old Testament connection, because he says he sees them like sheep without a shepherd. And this is more than just kind of a pastoral check-in. What are you celebrating? What are you maybe mourning? How can I be there? How can I pray for you? Certainly part of that. But part of the connection goes back to Numbers 27 and even Ezekiel 34. Where Moses, he's talking to God. He's already been denied the opportunity to go into the promised land. He says, "God, you got to make sure you raise up another guy. Otherwise, your folks are going to be like sheep without a shepherd." So he raises up Joshua. Well, Joshua is a military leader. He's going to give them direction, purpose, strategy. Here where we're going, we're going to conquer something. And then Ezekiel 34, this is just a rebuke to all the leaders, shepherds of Israel. He says, "You guys are living high on the hog, but my people are struggling. Where's the justice? Where's the care? You're supposed to be seeking the stray, bringing them back, teaching them, like my servant David did." They didn't do it. They're always going to be pointing back to this real shepherd. This is King Jesus. And it's how he's starting to kind of put on that identity. More than that, just the scene itself. He's in the wilderness. You got a lot of hungry people around. This has happened before. Last time it was Moses. He says, "I see all these folks. They're grumbling. They're hungry. God, I don't know how to feed these folks." Well, in turn, now the disciples turned to God. And Jesus said, "We got 5 loaves, 2 fish. The math doesn't add up. I can't feed 5,000 people." So he breaks them out. So again, he's kind of standing in the position where it's like all these Old Testament arrows are starting to kind of point to him. Further, the spot that he's actually talking, this is rural Galilee. It's like the epicenter of zealot movement. This guy named Judas the Galilean and Sepphoris is another guy because Israel is not a sovereign nation. They're under house arrest in their own house. Rome is there. They're the ones with the sovereignty. And they're tired of this. They want to push back. They want to be able to lead their own lives, be governed by their own people. So these zealots have intermittently stood up to try to make some kind of a pushback. So all of a sudden now they're looking at Jesus, and they see this. All right, he's got the stature, his words. He's talking with us, what he's saying, and then further now we just saw a sign. And one of the things is they partly interpret it correctly. John 6 kind of paints in the picture a little bit more for us. So they say, seeing him, they recognize this is the prophet that Moses talked about. Let's make him our king. Well, this is why Jesus starts to dismiss his disciples. Down here in verse 45, it says, "Immediately he, Jesus, made the disciples get in the boat and go ahead." Because his disciples are they're Israelites as well. They want to have a little freedom. And by their association with Jesus, they're like, if he raises up the ranks, so do we. But Jesus is trying to say, this is not the kind of king I've actually come to be. You've missed the sign. I gave you a miracle, but you missed where it was pointing to. You were looking for some kind of a messianic political leader, and this is not what I came for. Because they missed this miracle, they're going to miss the next one as well. The purpose of this one is even kind of elaborated more in John 6. Is Jesus says, I'm actually the bread. I'm offering you some bread because you're hungry. You have normal needs. The disciples were hungry. They engaged in some mission. He didn't forget about them. He said, here's a basket of bread for all of you. I recognize you have physical needs, but you need something more than this. I've come to be the bread. You're looking for satisfaction. It's in me. You can have a political society. You can have your own sovereignty. Those are good things, but you won't be satisfied like if you eat on me. Because he's making this connection, as we had talked about last week, how he had this interaction with John the Baptist and Herod. And we saw that to follow Jesus is going to cost you everything. It's a high call. It may cost your freedom. It may cost your life. But Jesus says, if you're going to follow me, I get all of you, but in return, you get all of me. I will satisfy you. But they don't get this miracle, so they're going to miss the next one. They don't see he's willingly giving, say, I will satisfy you. So the disciples are out on the water. Starts a heavy wind. Heavy wind on water is waves, not very good. You can sink. There are some diabolical waves and windstorms on the Sea of Galilee. Well, there's our next Old Testament connection. That Jesus starts to come walking on the water, and there's this statement where it says he wanted to pass them by. This is a connection because God passed by Moses. God passed by Elijah. And even Job 9, 8, and 11 says God's going to tread upon the water. It's just I can't see him. Well, here's one of our miracles. Jesus is saying, you're going to see me now. I put on some flesh. I'm coming down to you. But they're just so astounded. They're scared. They didn't get the last one. They didn't understand that part of this Messiah is going to come. It's not going to be for a physical reign. He's coming to reign your heart. He's going to reign in your heart. He cares for you. He saw the crowds and he had compassion on them. Well, he's praying on the land. He sees his disciples. He had compassion on them. They don't know that they're loved. So all they see is like a scary sight, and he comes and he gets on the boat. They don't see the fact that when he looks at them, he says there's no other height nor depth or distance or any storm that will keep you from me. I will defy nature. If I have to, I will come to you and I will be with you. That's the gift here. He's with them. So this is the greatest miracle that we're seeing here, is that Jesus has come to say, I'm going to give you my presence. I give you me. But we probably have to admit, like the disciples, we miss this. I might be a little more impressed if I see somebody kind of moonwalking across the top of the sea than actually caring about like, oh yeah, I want to be in your presence. Why do you want to be in my presence? I don't want to be in my presence. I think you can relate with that. I see ugliness. There's some good things. It's sunny outside. It's not always a rainy day. But why do you want to come to me? Why do you love me? Why will you cross the bounds of eternity to come to me? Why will you die for me? And more than that, it's like, I want to be with you. I offer you my presence. This is the greatest miracle possible, but yet we miss it. So this is where my words come to an end, because we can continue to talk about God's presence, but I don't think there's so much that can be said. It's like Jonathan Edwards said one time, it's like, how do you tell someone that honey's sweet? I don't know, put your finger in it, taste it. If it's not sweet, I don't know what to tell you. So if I could, please, if the music team, the worship team would come back up, because I want us just to kind of go into a time of prayer. And we're going to plead for God's presence. And much like we're seeing, pardon me, in this passage, I want us to even group up here. Maybe 5, 7 pairs. And I'm going to ask our elders and Titus 2 women, those who lead our church through serving. And much like the disciples here, if Jesus doesn't keep on multiplying the loaves, they got nothing to carry out. So we understand the sheer fact of like we are the same as everybody else in here. Lord Jesus, if you don't come, I'm chained to the wall. I can't reach you, but Jesus, you're free. You can actually come to me. So the elders and Titus 2 women will just kind of bounce around to groups and just ask you, is there anything to pray about? Because there may be some of us in here that, like these people, these 5,000, they see this Jesus, they just don't really know who he is. You worked a few miracles, you say a few nice things. You know, I don't know, it might be nice to be around here. Christians are nice folks. You might not know who he is. And he's offering his presence because he wants to get to know you. So that's what we want to pray around, is just pleading. Is just this is going to turn into a worship and kind of prayer time of, Lord, would you come? Would you do a miracle in my heart that I actually want to be in your presence? I would value this over like the miracle of maybe I got this huge promotion, or I got a new house, or, my wife is barren and now I have children. All wonderful miracles, beautiful things that we could actually want. But can I want this central miracle even more? Do a miracle there. I don't naturally want that. So please, elders and Ty Swimming, if you guys...